In the course of everyday life, when the endless chatter of the world finally softens and the noise of external demands fades away, we are left alone with our own thoughts. It is in such moments of silence that an uncomfortable yet profoundly revealing question may arise. Why do some people have no friends? On the surface, this appears to be a simple social question, one that concerns the presence or absence of companionship. But if we look more carefully, it carries far deeper psychological, emotional, and even spiritual meaning. Having no friends is not just a matter of social emptiness. It is a reflection of what solitude uncovers about the hidden world within a person. The great psychologist Machiavelli reminded us that our outer experiences are never random or disconnected from who we are. They mirror our inner life. From this perspective, the absence of friendships is not an accident of circumstance. It is a symbol, a living expression of unconscious processes that we may not yet recognize or fully understand. Solitude often speaks a language we cannot immediately translate, but one that carries essential truths about our inner being. For some individuals, withdrawing from friendships is not a deliberate choice, but the natural consequence of old wounds that left invisible scars. Painful childhood experiences, betrayals, or disappointments may have quietly taught them that closeness comes at too high a cost. For others, the world outside feels unbearably noisy, chaotic, and overwhelming, so they prefer to keep a safe distance, retreating into the quiet of their own inner sanctuary. And there are still others who, without bitterness, walk away from the crowd because they are searching for something more authentic, more essential, something that aligns with their deepest sense of truth, even if it means walking alone. When a person has no friends, we should not view it only as a social condition, but as a symbolic window into the soul. Through that window we can glimpse not only old wounds and unspoken fears, but also hidden longings, forgotten truths, and strengths that are waiting to be born. Solitude, in this sense, becomes both a mirror and a teacher. What initially appears as emptiness can, over time, transform into a source of insight and even a gift. From a Jungian perspective, loneliness is never a meaningless accident. It is a message, a form of communication from the unconscious, urging us to look more deeply at ourselves. It invites us to notice what we have repressed, neglected, or abandoned within our own psyche, and perhaps, just perhaps, the absence of external relationships serves a higher purpose, to push us toward building the most vital relationship of all, the relationship with ourselves. To have no friends does not automatically mean a person is unworthy of connection or that they lack the qualities needed for human closeness. In fact, most often the roots are buried much deeper, beneath the surface of consciousness. Jungian psychology teaches us that the foundation is often laid in childhood. The child who grows up unseen, unheard, or misunderstood quickly internalizes the message that their emotions are not valuable. Such a child, when grown, often becomes an adult who hesitates to speak, retreats into silence, and constructs invisible walls of protection around their heart. Rejection, too, can shape the pattern. A single painful experience of being excluded, mocked, or betrayed may echo for years, gradually teaching the unconscious that it is safer to remain alone than to risk the vulnerability of closeness. Yet within this very pain lies the seed of transformation. The protective wall, though isolating, also keeps intact a reservoir of unspent emotional energy. Energy that, when recognized and consciously integrated, can be redirected toward creativity, self-understanding, and even compassion for others who suffer in silence. In this light, having no friends is not simply a lack. It is an inner condition filled with meaning. It challenges us to ask deeper questions. What parts of ourselves have we hidden away? What forgotten wounds still whisper through our silence? And how can we turn loneliness into a path toward authenticity and inner growth? For Machiavelli, the task is not to escape loneliness but to listen to it carefully. For within its voice we may discover not only the shadows of our past, but also the possibility of becoming whole. Those who have endured exclusion, ridicule, or abandonment often carry invisible scars that quietly shape their behavior. In order to shield themselves from further disappointment or rejection, they develop an almost automatic reflex to isolate. This withdrawal is not a mere preference for solitude but a survival strategy, born from the need to avoid being wounded again. The soul, fearful of new pain, instinctively chooses the safer shelter of aloneness over the uncertainty and potential betrayal of human closeness. Yet sometimes the reasons for having no friendships are not rooted in trauma, but in differences of depth and consciousness. There are people whose inner world is vast and profound, who naturally feel out of place in a society where conversations often skim only the surface. For such individuals, small talk feels hollow and draining. They long instead for rare, genuine connections, encounters that touch the essential core of life and resonate with the heart. In a world dominated by triviality, these souls often find themselves standing apart, waiting for relationships that reflect the authenticity they crave. From this perspective, the absence of friendship should never be interpreted as a simple social deficit. It is not merely the lack of company, but the outward expression of complex inner processes, old wounds, unacknowledged fears, unique sensitivities, and heightened awareness. To dismiss such solitude as emptiness is to overlook the richness of the psychological and spiritual life that lies beneath it. Machiavelli captured this truth with striking clarity when he said, "Loneliness does not arise from not having people around you, but from being unable to share what matters to you." This insight reminds us that what isolates a person is often not the absence of others, but the absence of meaningful resonance. Thus, when we encounter someone who lives without close friends, we should resist judging them by appearances. What looks like emptiness from the outside often hides a fertile inner world, an unseen landscape filled with silent struggles, unspoken fears, and yet also with potential for profound growth. Often, what seems to be a lack is in fact a calling, a deep summons of the soul toward authenticity and consciousness. The absence of friendships, therefore, is not just a social fact, it is a symbol deeply embedded in the psyche. Loneliness is more than a random or unfortunate state. It carries the quality of an archetype, an enduring image that accompanies human beings as they journey towards self-knowledge. We see this archetype appear again and again across spiritual and mythological traditions. The figure of the hermit, the one who leaves the noise of the world to walk alone, embodies the very essence of this inner journey. Whether in the stories of sages who retreat into mountains, saints who enter deserts, or mystics who abandon society for contemplation, the same pattern repeats. Solitude becomes the gateway to wisdom. Even in the symbolism of the tarot, the hermit card depicts an old man holding a lamp, searching for the inner light that guides him. It is no coincidence, then, that many people who live without friendships unknowingly walk a similar path. They may not consciously choose the archetype, but something within their own soul calls them toward introspection and self-discovery. Their solitude becomes the stage upon which inner truths demand recognition. Seen through this lens, solitude is not punishment, nor is it deficiency. It is part of a timeless journey toward wholeness. While at first it may wound, in time it illuminates. For those who have the courage to sit with its silence, loneliness eventually reveals itself not as a void but as a vessel, one that carries the light of inner transformation and the promise of a more authentic life. Whoever dares to remain without the constant distraction of external noise soon finds themselves confronted with something far more unsettling, their own shadow. In the stillness of solitude, the inner landscape rises to the surface, fears long buried, wounds never healed, but also the vast reservoir of unused potential waiting for recognition. The collective unconscious does not speak in words but in symbols, and one of its most profound symbols is loneliness itself. To be alone is not always to be abandoned. It is often a call, a symbolic summons for retreat, for silence, for a confrontation with truths that cannot be heard amid the endless clamor of society. This pattern is as old as humanity. Just as the mythological hero must wander through deserts, enter caves, or endure the dark night of the soul before reaching their goal, so too does the modern human encounter loneliness as a form of initiation. What, at first glance, appears to be a social failure, "I have no friends," is on a deeper level a rite of passage. The psyche, in its mysterious wisdom, creates conditions that force the individual to look inward. Even when the conscious mind resists or fails to understand, the soul whispers insistently, "Now is the moment. Listen to yourself, discover yourself before you can truly meet others. I recall a patient who once sat across from me and said with quiet despair, "Doctor, I have no friends. I feel alone." To the outer world, these words might sound like defeat, the language of failure or loss. But I did not hear only absence. I heard the seed of possible transformation. I saw, within the very pain of their withdrawal, the potential for a profound discovery, that they might in this forced silence uncover hidden parts of themselves, parts that would have remained invisible had they always been surrounded by constant company. Properly understood, loneliness is not merely an affliction, it is an opening. It unlocks the doorway to authenticity and inner freedom. Society, which so often equates worth with popularity, dismisses solitude as weakness. But from the perspective of the soul, what seems like weakness to the outside world may be the first fragile step toward true inner strength. To walk alone is not to be lesser, it is to be initiated into a deeper dialogue with oneself. When a person succeeds in turning inward, when they make peace with their shadow and embrace the forgotten aspects of their being, something remarkable occurs. Future relationships are no longer built on masks, pretenses, or superficial exchanges. They emerge from the ground of authenticity. They are born from the depth of inner strength, and therefore they have the power to nourish and endure. Of course, the first stages of this journey are often painful. In cultures where worth is measured by the number of friends, followers, or social connections, to have none seems like a personal indictment, a glaring sign of inadequacy. But psychology teaches us to see beyond appearances. What looks like failure is often a calling. The absence of friends is not an accident. It is a message from the soul, a symbolic necessity for transformation. It is the unconscious saying, withdraw, reflect, discover who you are, so that one day you may return to the world not as a fragment, but as a whole. The unconscious does not speak to us in plain words, but in symbols, circumstances, and seemingly random coincidences that compel the conscious self to pause and reflect. Just as dreams arrive in the night with their encrypted messages, attempts to restore inner balance, so too does external life mirror back to us the truths we most need to understand. In this light, the absence of friendships can be understood not merely as social misfortune, but as a symbolic message. It is the psyche's way of saying, now is the time to let the masks fall. Now is the time to encounter yourself. The absence of friends can therefore reveal that life demands greater honesty and authenticity from a person, qualities they may have suppressed out of fear, habit, or the pressure to conform. When the masks can no longer be worn without breaking the spirit, the forced relationships naturally dissolve, and what remains is loneliness. Yet hidden within this loneliness lies the seed of the real, the possibility of rebirth into an identity aligned not with the expectations of others, but with the truth of one's own inner being. This is the very path Machiavelli described as individuation, the process of becoming one's authentic self. Those who find themselves friendless, isolated, or excluded often stand at the threshold of this phase. The unconscious demands of them a radical act, to stop being a copy and to finally become themselves. It is an invitation to shed the old skin, like a snake that must outgrow what is no longer alive, and to be reborn into a life truer to the soul's essence. This archetypal pattern echoes through countless myths and sacred stories. Heroes, before they can fulfill their destinies, must first endure exile. Moses wandered in the desert before receiving his mission. The Buddha withdrew into solitude under the Bodhi tree before awakening to enlightenment. Even Christ withdrew for 40 days into the wilderness before beginning his ministry. In each case, isolation was not a mark of weakness or failure, but the threshold to revelation. Such stories remind us that separation is not an ending, but a beginning. The soul often pulls us away from the superficial not to diminish us, but to lead us toward what is essential. To be without friends, then, is not always a sign of emptiness. It can be a sign that an inner meaning, long hidden, is ready to be discovered. Solitude becomes the lamp that lights the way to authenticity. A meaning of this kind cannot be grasped in noise or distraction. It demands silence, reflection, and the rare courage to remain alone. Loneliness, in this sense, is not about renouncing human closeness forever, nor is it an argument for withdrawal from society. Rather, it is a preparation, a way of ensuring that when relationships do emerge again, they are born of authenticity and truth, rather than from fear of rejection or the desperate desire to belong. Loneliness teaches us a truth many prefer to avoid. Sometimes we must lose ourselves in darkness in order to discover the light that can only rise from the deepest layers of the soul. The absence of friends confronts us not only with the silence of the outer world, but also with a mirror turned inward. And what this mirror reflects is often unsettling: our shadow. I often describe the shadow as those parts of the personality that we have rejected, repressed, or denied because they did not fit the image we wanted the world or even ourselves to see. We push aside vulnerability, jealousy, fear, anger, desire, or grief, believing them unworthy or shameful. But repression does not erase them. Everything that is denied simply withdraws into the unconscious and waits there, patient and persistent, for the moment it will rise again. When someone passes through a period without friends, when social distractions vanish and superficial ties dissolve, the psyche creates exactly the conditions in which the shadow steps forward. The silence, once so feared, becomes an amplifier. In that quiet, suppressed feelings begin to surface: sadness that has been long postponed, anger swallowed for years, envy never admitted, old resentments, forgotten fears, and even secret longings that one never dared to acknowledge. In ordinary life, the noise of constant social contact keeps these voices drowned out. But when the outer world falls silent, they speak with renewed force. Many people resist this stage precisely because it is difficult to face what has been hidden. The conscious ego prefers to identify with what is acceptable, bright, and admired. It resists admitting that loneliness, rage, weakness, or vulnerability are also part of our humanity. Yet here lies one of the great paradoxes of depth psychology. Only by confronting and accepting the shadow can true transformation begin. Avoidance keeps us fragmented. Integration brings us toward wholeness. To enter into dialogue with what we fear most is to uncover hidden energy, creativity, and strength. Thus, when someone finds themselves with no friends, it is not always a cruel twist of fate. Sometimes it is the psyche's way of removing every possible escape route, stripping away the masks, and forcing a confrontation that has long been postponed. Isolation dismantles the false protections and obliges us to meet ourselves as we truly are. In this sense, pain becomes a teacher. Loneliness becomes not an enemy but a guide. And the shadow, once feared, reveals itself not as a monster to be destroyed, but as a part of the soul waiting to be recognized, embraced, and transformed. Every feeling we repress and later encounter again is not an enemy, but a fragment of the psyche calling out for recognition and reconciliation. I have witnessed this countless times in patients their darkest hours, those moments when they felt the crushing solitude of having no one by their side, often marked the very threshold of awakening. What appeared at first as unbearable emptiness turned out to be the doorway to deeper meaning. For behind each painful emotion hides a symbol. Anger, when examined, is often the soul's demand for justice. Sadness, heavy though it feels, carries within it a call for self-love and healing. Envy, which most reject with shame, points toward untapped potential, the abilities we have neglected in ourselves but admired in others. And fear, so often avoided, is the very boundary marker of our inner growth, showing us precisely where we must expand. Loneliness strips a person of illusions and confronts them with their truth. It removes the possibility of endless distraction, silences the noise of company, and leaves no one else to blame. What torments us, we come to realize, is not merely external circumstance but a reality living within. And in this painful recognition, in the moment when we cease to flee and instead turn toward our own darkness, the work of integration begins. This journey resembles the timeless stories of myth. The hero must descend into the depths, face the dragon, and pass through fire before finding the treasure. The absence of friends pushes us into a similar symbolic descent into the caverns of the inner world where the dragon awaits. This dragon is nothing other than our shadow, our fears, our guilt, our insecurities, the parts of ourselves we have denied. At first it terrifies us, but ultimately it is not there to destroy us. What seems like punishment is in truth preparation. The shadow is not an enemy, but energy, raw, unrecognized, and unintegrated. Once faced and accepted, this energy undergoes transformation. It becomes creativity, wisdom, compassion, and freedom. Thus, the absence of friends is not a cruel fate, but a profound signpost. It is time to make peace with oneself. Life, by stripping us of external company, leads us back to the only companion we can never lose, our whole self, with its light and its shadow. Whoever dares to cross the desert of loneliness and to confront the shadow without running, discovers that something subtle yet profound begins to shift within. This painful phase is nothing less than an alchemical process. What appears outwardly as loss is, in reality, initiation. The first transformation always occurs within. And whoever has endured loneliness without fleeing from it, whoever has listened to the silence rather than drowning it out, learns something invaluable. They learn to listen to themselves, and in that listening, they take their first steps toward becoming whole. In the silence of solitude, something subtle yet extraordinary happens. A person becomes an observer of their own thoughts, feelings, and wounds. Instead of running from themselves, they begin to discover that they can, in fact, endure their own company. More than that, they come to realize that within them lies a wellspring of creativity, intuition, and wisdom that had long been drowned out by the constant noise of the outer world. This process resembles the ancient myth of the phoenix. After being consumed in the fire of loneliness and facing the trial of the shadow, the individual rises again, not as the same person, but as someone transformed. They return to life with deeper awareness and an identity no longer chained to external approval or validation. This is the gift of the inner fire, destruction that becomes rebirth, emptiness that becomes renewal. And it is precisely in this rebirth that the possibility emerges to build relationships of a different order. Previously, many friendships were unconsciously shaped by inner voids, repressed wounds, or a fear of abandonment. Bonds were often sought not out of genuine desire for connection, but as a way of filling gaps, escaping the shadow, or distracting oneself from inner emptiness. Loneliness exposes this pattern, breaks it apart, and clears the ground. After a phase of deep introspection, the motivation for connection changes fundamentally. Relationships are no longer born from fear or dependency, but from inner abundance and freedom. In my clinical work, I have observed repeatedly that people who pass through such a solitary period begin to attract different kinds of connections. They no longer crave the noisy crowd that distracts, but seek encounters that nourish. They no longer settle for surface-level exchanges, but long for companions who allow truth to be spoken, who nurture growth, and who walk alongside them on the path of individuation. In this way, the pain of having no friends prepares the soul to welcome the right ones. The absence is not permanent emptiness. It is a clearing of the soil, a necessary preparation for seeds that will later grow into meaningful bonds. What is most fascinating is that this transformation reshapes not only a person's relationships with others, but their relationship with life itself. Whoever has truly learned to be alone no longer fears silence, rejection, or abandonment. They know they can carry themselves. And from this inner stability they meet the world with fewer masks and greater authenticity. It is as if such a person develops an invisible magnet. They no longer draw others by need or pretense, but by the truth of their being. And authenticity has its own resonance. It attracts those souls who have walked similar paths of self-discovery, those who recognize in another the same hard-earned depth. Thus, after a passage through loneliness, people often find themselves forming friendships, intimate relationships, or even love that are marked by honesty, maturity, and endurance, relationships that were impossible before the transformation. Symbolically, loneliness acts as a portal. First, it drags us downward into the realm of the shadow, forcing us to face what was hidden. Then, having endured the descent, it allows us to re-emerge carrying a light that is purer, steadier, and more conscious. When the outer noise finally falls silent and distractions dissolve, the essential questions of life rise to the surface. Who am I really? What is the meaning of my existence? What gives direction and purpose to my days? Such questions cannot be answered in the crowded chorus of opinions or through the shallow comfort of social approval. They can only be approached in the intimacy of the soul, in the quiet dialogue one carries within. It is precisely in these phases of solitude that a new kind of relationship begins to unfold. The relationship with the spiritual. A person slowly realizes that he is not truly abandoned but accompanied by something greater, the collective unconscious universal archetypes, and the ancient wisdom that speaks through symbols, dreams, and synchronicities. With the closing of external doors, an inner one opens into the eternal. The soul requires silence for its awakening, because without silence there can be no true listening, and without listening there can be no revelation. What first appears as emptiness is, in truth, a sacred space in which something divine prepares to reveal itself. This is why loneliness has always held an essential role in the spiritual traditions of humanity. Prophets, sages, and initiates retreated into deserts, climbed mountains, and embraced long silences, not as escape, but as initiation. They knew that only in the absence of noise could the deepest truth emerge. The absence of friends, then, can itself be understood as a symbolic path of initiation, a summons from the soul to look beneath appearances and beyond the surface of life. Whoever learns to carry themselves through loneliness, whoever discovers inner wealth without relying on external companionship, becomes free. They are no longer dependent on the presence of others to feel complete, for they have found their center in a deeper bond with the eternal, with what some call God, with the self, or with the wholeness of the psyche. And what is most astonishing is that this contact with the spiritual does not arrive as theory, doctrine, or second-hand belief. It does not descend as dogma from outside, but reveals itself directly through living experience. It may appear in a dream brimming with archetypal images, in a seemingly chance encounter that sheds unexpected light, or in a quiet sense of companionship even during the darkest night of the soul. In these moments, a person realizes something profound. There is within me that which does not die, does not break, and remains unshakable despite loss, absence, or abandonment. This recognition is the deepest gift loneliness can bestow. For in the end, solitude itself becomes a spiritual teacher, severe, patient, and uncompromising, yet ultimately guiding the soul toward wholeness, resilience, and peace. Loneliness strips away the superfluous, confronts us with our fragility, and at the same time connects us to a source of strength that transcends the human. The ego may suffer, but the soul recognizes what is occurring, preparation for a life that is truer, more conscious, and more deeply rooted in the sacred that dwells within every human being. I have learned that often, what man fears most is precisely what he most needs. Loneliness, as much as the conscious mind resists it, is one of those profound mysteries. Many flee from it, into distractions, into superficial attachments, into the relentless noise of the external world so as not to hear the inner voice. Yet those who find themselves without friends or who are removed by fate from social circles stand at a threshold, the threshold of their own transformation. Loneliness is not punishment, it is initiation, a silent ritual the psyche prepares for those who must find the path to their truest self. For only those who dare to remain with themselves discover the depth of their own soul. Individuation, the central process of psychological and spiritual development, does not occur in the crowd, but in the quiet gathering of the inner world. It is a journey toward wholeness, a reconciliation of opposing elements within the psyche, shadow and light, feminine and masculine, conscious and unconscious. When life removes external friendships, it grants the opportunity to cultivate the most essential bond of all, the friendship with oneself. No connection is more necessary than this, for from it springs the capacity to love and relate authentically, without dependence, manipulation, or submission. Those who have discovered themselves in solitude no longer seek fulfillment in the presence of others. They share from their inner fullness. Loneliness teaches that true freedom does not lie in doing everything we desire, but in becoming fully who we are, unmasked and unbound by roles or expectations. It releases us from the tyranny of others' approval, the fear of rejection, and the compulsion to constantly please. In this empty space, free from external companionship, we uncover a life brimming with meaning. Once we cease searching externally for what can only be found within, loneliness opens the door to the eternal. In the stillness where the noise of the world falls silent, the self begins to whisper. That core within us, the spark that connects with the divine, reveals that we were never truly alone. Something greater has always been present, a guiding meaning that transcends understanding. Thus, the absence of friends is not a sentence to bitterness, but an invitation to awakening. It is the call to walk through the dark night in order to discover the light within ourselves. It is the crucible in which the soul is tempered, the mirror in which we confront, integrate, and ultimately rise above our shadows. Loneliness is not the end, but the threshold of transformation, a sacred passage into the fullness of life, consciousness, and the profound freedom of being. The presence of your own soul, waiting patiently for recognition. This light is your truth, your essence, your destiny. Loneliness ceases to be a burden and becomes a privilege. The privilege of truly knowing yourself, of confronting your depths, transforming and emerging renewed. Whoever realizes this understands that what once seemed like absence was, in reality, a profound presence. A presence that nurtures, guides, and prepares you for life, lived authentically, fully, and in harmony with your inner being. It is here, in this sacred solitude, that you discover the resilience, wisdom, and creative power that have always lain dormant within. What was once feared as emptiness becomes the fertile soil of your becoming. In embracing loneliness, you embrace yourself, and in embracing yourself, you awaken to the eternal, unshakable light that has never left.